Today we're going to talk about the fallout from Donald Trump's embarrassment of a military parade versus the hugely successful No King's Day protest and an unintended consequence for Republicans ahead of the next election. And I've got two interviews. I speak with Senator Alex Padilla about being assaulted and handcuffed by Trump officials and Congressman Jamie Raskin about the threats posed by Trump. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen and you're watching No Lie. In with a bang, out with a whimper. Donald Trump's military parade came and went, and if you haven't seen the footage online yet, I would highly recommend that you watch it, because if this parade was a person, it would be Ben Stein, but somehow on Xanax. And the best part is that it was so sparsely attended. This is what it sounded like in one clip where a tank is rolling down the street. The squeaking is the wheels. Do you understand how quiet it has to be to hear the wheels of a vehicle squeaking during a parade? I wouldn't be able to hear the wheels of my car squeaking on some county highway. The notion you should be able to hear the wheels of a tank during a full-blown parade is just brutal. And so, whereas Trump wanted this event to make him look strong and powerful, instead he looked incredibly pathetic. And of course, that was exacerbated by the fact that millions of Americans also took to the streets on the same day in 2,000 cities across the United States. The parade in Idaho had more people than Donald Trump had at his $50 million vanity parade in Washington, D.C. And so not only was Donald Trump humiliated by the sheer mediocrity of his big parade that he wanted to rival the Bastille Day celebration in France, but the only thing that did turn people out that day was the protest attended by people who hate the guy. But I was asked by one of my friends, not a political junkie, but somebody who tries to pay attention to politics anyway, why does this matter? Like, what changes as the result of this? And we've spent a lot of time between November and now talking about culture, how Republicans won culture in the last election. It was more socially acceptable to support Donald Trump than it was to support Democrats. But days like Saturday are how you change culture. And this is anecdotal, but I know of people who had posted right-wing content heading into November's election who then showed up at these protests because these protests broke through. They became a cultural phenomenon. Everybody in the country attended them. They were the biggest story in America. And they perpetuate a narrative all taken together about Donald Trump and Republicans that is sticking. And so from Saturday to Sunday, on paper, look, nothing changes. Donald Trump is still president. He'll still act lawlessly. He'll still engage in rampant corruption. And he's no less powerful than he was. But socially, culturally, the pendulum is swinging. And there's no ignoring the implications of that. The reality is that the No Kings protest felt a lot like the Women's March in 2017. Those events dictated culture. And by the way, look at what followed. Democrats won the House by the biggest margin in modern American history. They flipped 41 seats and got full control of Congress. That's to say nothing of the fact that also in 2017, Republicans attacked the ACA in very much the same way that Republicans are attacking Medicaid right now. So the similarities are pretty abundant, but I cannot stress enough how important the intangibles are here. You cannot look at millions of Americans taking to the streets and ignore the broader message that that sends. And at a time where the left has largely struggled to win these cultural battles, to win these cultural optics against the right, this is a really welcome change. I'm not saying, by the way, that we've got this in the bag or that Democrats have become master messengers or any of that stuff, but we have been waiting for the tide to turn. And this weekend we watched it do exactly that. More work to do, of course, but let's take the wins where we can get them. I will take millions of Americans protesting Trump while he sits slumped over at his sparsely attended North Korea parade any day of the week. As they're targeting folks who are on work sites, whether it's on construction sites, they're targeting folks in the fields, picking the food that not only Californians, but everybody across this country eats, that it's not exactly hardened criminals as they promised. And so can I have your reaction to the fact that the folks who believe Donald Trump amid his promises of these mass deportation efforts, as it was focused on hardened criminals, got sold a bill of goods because that isn't at all what's happening right now?
Exactly. And so you're touching on two of my key points from yesterday. Number one, the question I was trying to ask is, what about everybody else? Because they'll put out generic stats, maybe that there's been dozens or hundreds, however many people they think they have detained, and maybe there's due process, maybe not. but the names that they were listing at this press conference was only maybe a half dozen. And so what about all the cooks, all the farm workers, all the car wash workers, all the others,
Right.
non-violent migrants? That was one of the issues I was trying to point out when all this happened, because the claims of only targeting dangerous, violent criminals has been a lie. It's been a lie. And so many of the other people that have been caught up in their increasingly extreme, theatrical, cruel enforcement actions are otherwise hardworking people that are contributing to our economy. And we should definitely talk about that. So that's number one. Because they're not transparent with the data, I wanted to ask that question. But you give the example of all these folks in key industries, right? In the food supply chain, in hospitality, in healthcare, in construction. What they did when I had the audacity to ask a question, imagine what they could do, imagine what they are doing to a lot of folks who may not feel free to speak up or may have a question
Right.
and there's not cameras there to capture how they may or may not be treated. That's the big takeaway. This should be a wake-up call for everybody across the country. If this can happen to United States Senator, not just on the issue of trying to defend due process and maybe immigrants' rights, but anybody who disagrees with them on reproductive rights, on marriage equality, on whether or not climate change is real, or the need to maintain a federal government and a social safety net. Look what they're doing with the big budget bill that House Republicans voted it out happily, and now Senate Republicans are trying to move quickly on it, gutting the healthcare system, impacting Social Security, housing, and more. So this crisis that's been manufactured in Los Angeles has also been a distraction tool, which the Trump administration is very, very good at. Let's get everybody talking about Los Angeles and what's happening in a very small portion of downtown to take attention away from the budget, from Russia, Ukraine, from the breakup with Elon Musk, and more.
So, Congressman, in the last 24 hours, we, of course, saw this assault and attempted arrest of Senator Padilla. This comes in the aftermath of Donald Trump's goons basically arresting the governor of Newark. We've had Democratic lawmakers, Democratic staffers, Jerry Nadler's staffer in New York. And so this has become a recurring theme. We have a judge in Wisconsin at the same time that we're now seeing Donald Trump prepare for a military birthday parade in Washington, D.C. And so we have a lot of different elements of what an autocratic leader would do. And so how are you thinking about this moment as you see all of these different instances that would normally represent an autocracy, an authoritarian leader, kind of collide at the same time?
Yeah, I mean, these are all of the certain clues of an authoritarian regime in the making. So they arrest a sitting state court judge in Wisconsin. They have indicted my colleague LaMonica McGyver from New Jersey for felony offenses that could total 17 years in prison for going to a scheduled visit to an ICE facility and then just being in the crowd where they arrested the mayor. They had to drop those charges. They barged into Jerry Nadler's office and traumatized a 24-year-old staff assistant who was in tears as they handcuffed her for no reason at all. And then yesterday they threw to the ground United States Senator, Senator Padilla from California, for asking a question, for posing a question in a federal building where his office is, of a cabinet official. And that's on top of sending the Marines to the United States, to California, and federalizing the National Guard there, although that has been reversed by Judge Breyer in the United States District Court, dealing the 194th setback to Trump in court in terms of preliminary injunctions and temporary restraining orders. But the path is clear. We're on the path towards straight up authoritarianism.
I mean, we often hear about the creep toward autocracy. I'm pretty certain that if we saw any of these things happening in aggregate or even in isolation in any other country, we wouldn't hesitate for a second to call it what it is, which is autocracy or dictatorship. And so do you think trying to take an objective view of this, that this has already arrived? It's not like we're waiting for a constitutional crisis in the US. We are in the midst of one in the United States. And to that point, then, I know people are going to be looking at this and they're going to be worried about about whether there's even a way to come back from this. And so what would you say to those folks?
Well, I would say, yeah, the struggle and the crisis is here. The Constitution has been under attack now for a long time by these people, and they are getting more brazen in deploying state power to try to crush dissent. On the other hand, everywhere I go in the country, I'm seeing people more and more resolved and determined to fight back. And I'm not just talking about people in the streets, I'm talking about governors and mayors and elected officials and judges who are standing up for the Constitution and the rule of law.
And of course, to watch the full interviews with Alex Padilla and Jamie Raskin, click the thumbnails right here on the screen or check out the interviews playlist on my YouTube channel. You can also click the link on the screen to listen to the audio version of this episode, and of course, to watch more of my content, the subscribe button's on the screen as well.